Good evening, fellow travelers of the mysterious and unknown. Tonight, we journey through America's most legendary haunted locations, places where history and mystery intertwine, where the past refuses to rest quietly, and where countless witnesses have encountered the unexplained. These are not mere campfire tales, but documented accounts that have captivated Americans for generations, from the rolling hills of Tennessee to the battlefields of Pennsylvania, from Louisiana plantations to California mansions. We'll explore 6 locations where the veil between worlds seems remarkably thin. So settle back, close your eyes, and let us transport you to these storied places where American history lives on in ways that defy explanation. These tales remind us that some stories are too powerful to be forgotten, and some spirits too determined to simply fade away.
Story 1. The Bell Witch of Tennessee. In the rolling hills of Robertson County, Tennessee, near the Red River, stands a modest arm that was once home to one of America's most famous supernatural encounters. The year was 1817, and John Bell, a prosperous farmer, lived here with his wife Lucy and their 9 children in what seemed to be an ordinary frontier household. John Bell was a respected member of the Red River Baptist Church, known for his integrity and hard work. The Bell family had settled in Tennessee in 1804, clearing the land and building a comfortable life in the wilderness. Nothing in their quiet rural existence prepared them for what was about to unfold. It began, as many strange tales do, with something small and easily dismissed. John Bell was inspecting his corn crop on a warm August evening when he spotted an unusual animal sitting between the rows. It appeared to be a dog, but unlike any breed he recognized, with the head of a rabbit and the body of a hound. When Bell shot at the creature, it simply vanished. That same night, the Bell family was awakened by sounds coming from outside their log cabin, knocking on the walls, scratching at the wood, and what sounded like chains being dragged across the roof. John Bell, armed with his rifle, searched the property thoroughly but found nothing that could explain the disturbance. The sounds continued night after night, gradually growing bolder and moving inside the house. The entity, for it soon became clear that this was no ordinary pest problem, began pulling blankets from beds, slapping family members, and pulling the hair of the Bell children, particularly focusing its attention on 12-year-old Betsy Bell. What made the Bell Witch case extraordinary was not just the intensity of the phenomena, but the credibility of the witnesses. Neighbors, church members, and even skeptical visitors came to investigate and left as believers. The entity began to speak, initially in whispers and clicks, then in a clear, intelligent voice that could carry on conversations and demonstrate knowledge of events happening miles away. The spirit identified itself by several names over the years, but most commonly claimed to be Old Kate Betts, a neighbor who had disputed land deals with John Bell. However, the entity sometimes claimed to be the spirit of an early settler, or even proclaimed itself to be a demon sent to torment the Bell family. General Andrew Jackson, before he became president, heard about the Bell Witch and decided to investigate personally. According to family accounts, Jackson and his men approached the Bell farm in a wagon, but when they reached the Bell property line, the wheels locked and the horses could not pull the wagon forward, despite the road being smooth and level. "By the Eternal," Jackson reportedly said, "it's the witch." At that moment, an invisible voice called out, "All right, General, let the wagon move on. I will see you again tonight." The wheels immediately unlocked, and the party proceeded to the Bell farm. That evening, one of Jackson's men, a professional witch hunter who boasted he could defeat any supernatural entity, was reportedly slapped, pinched, and finally kicked by invisible forces until he fled the premises. Jackson and his remaining party left the next morning, with the future president stating he would rather fight the entire British Army than deal with the Bell Witch again. The phenomena affected the entire family, but Betsy Bell bore the brunt of the entity's attention. The witch seemed determined to prevent Betsy's engagement to Joshua Gardner, a local young man. During the 4-year haunting, Betsy would often fall into fits or trances during which she would speak in the witch's voice, relaying messages and prophecies. The harassment of John Bell was particularly severe. The entity claimed it would torment him until he died, and indeed, Bell's health declined steadily during the haunting. He suffered from seizures, facial twitching, and difficulty swallowing, symptoms that worsened whenever the witch's voice was heard threatening him. In December 2020, John Bell's condition became critical. The family found a small vial of dark liquid in his medicine cabinet that no one recognized. When they tested the liquid on the family cat, the animal died immediately. The witch's voice boasted, "I gave old Jack a big dose of that last night, which fixed him." John Bell died on December 20th, 2010. During his funeral, the witch's voice could be heard singing drinking songs and expressing satisfaction at his death. The entity's presence diminished significantly after Bell's funeral, though it continued to interact occasionally with the family. Before departing, the Bell Witch made a promise to Lucy Bell that it would return to visit the family in 7 years. True to its word, in 1828, the entity returned briefly, speaking primarily with John Bell, Jr., predicting the Civil War and other future events with remarkable accuracy, before announcing its intention to visit the descendants in 1935. Some members of the Bell family reported encounters in 1935, though these were far less dramatic than the original haunting. The Bell Witch legend has persisted for over 2 centuries, supported by extensive documentation, witness testimonies, and the fact that it was investigated by some of the most prominent figures of early American history. Today, the Bell farm is still owned by descendants of the family, and while the most intense phenomena ended with John Bell's death, visitors and residents occasionally report unexplained sounds, cold spots, and the feeling of being watched in the fields where America's most famous poltergeist once held court. The Bell Witch case remains unique in American folklore because of its duration, the quality of its witnesses, and the detailed records kept by the family. It stands perhaps as the most thoroughly documented supernatural case in American history, a reminder that some mysteries resist all attempts at rational explanation.
Story 2. The Myrtles Plantation, Louisiana's crown jewel of hauntings. Deep in the heart of Louisiana, where Spanish moss drapes ancient oak trees like ghostly curtains, stands the Myrtles Plantation, a magnificent antebellum mansion that has earned the reputation as one of America's most haunted homes. Built in 1796 by General David Bradford, this elegant estate has witnessed over 2 centuries of joy, sorrow, love, loss, and tragedies that seem to echo through its halls to this day. The plantation sits on 600 acres of rolling Louisiana countryside, about 30 miles north of Baton Rouge near St. Francisville. With its distinctive 125-foot-long gallery supported by ornate cast-iron columns, the mansion exemplifies the grandeur of the antebellum South while harboring secrets that have fascinated visitors for generations. General Bradford, a leader in the Whiskey Rebellion, fled Pennsylvania and established this plantation as his refuge in Spanish-controlled Louisiana. He named it Laurel Grove, and under his ownership, it became a prosperous sugar plantation worked by enslaved people whose stories remain intertwined with the property's supernatural reputation. The most famous spirit associated with the Myrtles is Chloe, a slave woman whose tragic story has been passed down through generations. According to legend, Chloe worked as a house servant and became involved in an affair with Bradford's son-in-law, Judge Clark Woodruff, who later owned the plantation. When Woodruff grew tired of the relationship and threatened to send Chloe to work in the fields, a fate that meant harder labor and separation from her children, Chloe began eavesdropping on family conversations, hoping to learn information that might secure her position in the house. One day, Judge Woodruff caught Chloe listening at a keyhole. As punishment, he ordered that her ear be cut off, a brutal but not uncommon punishment for slaves caught eavesdropping. From that day forward, Chloe wore a green turban to hide her disfigurement, and it's in this distinctive head wrap that her spirit is most often seen. Desperate to regain the family's favor and prove her loyalty, Chloe devised what she thought was a clever plan. She would make the Woodruff children mildly ill with a small amount of poison in a birthday cake, then nurse them to health, thereby proving her indispensable value to the family. Tragically, Chloe miscalculated the dosage. Sarah Matilda Woodruff, the judge's wife, and two of her daughters, Cornelia and James, died from the poison cake. Only the youngest child, a baby, survived. The other slaves, terrified that they would all be punished for Chloe's actions, dragged her from her cabin and hanged her from one of the plantation's majestic oak trees. Her body was then thrown into the Mississippi River. Since that tragic day in 1823, visitors to the Myrtles have reported countless encounters with Chloe's spirit. She appears most often on the plantation's famous wraparound porch, still wearing her green turban, sometimes carrying a candle or appearing to tend to invisible children. Guests have photographed what appears to be a woman in period dress standing at the mansion's windows, and multiple witnesses have reported seeing Chloe's reflections in mirrors throughout the house, even when no one is standing before them. But Chloe is not the plantation's only resident spirit. The Myrtles is also home to the ghosts of Sarah Matilda and her daughters, who died so tragically from the poisoned cake. Visitors often report the sound of children playing in the mansion's halls, the patter of small feet on the grand staircase, and the faint laughter of little girls echoing through rooms where no children are present. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence is a large mirror in the house that allegedly shows handprints and shapes that cannot be removed, despite repeated cleanings. Legend holds that Sarah Matilda and her children were not properly blessed when they died, so their spirits became trapped in the mirror. Visitors often report seeing figures moving within the glass and handprints appearing on the surface. The plantation's tragic history didn't end with the Woodruff family. Over the decades, the Myrtles has been the site of numerous unexplained deaths. William Drew Winter, a lawyer who lived in the house, was shot on the front porch in 1871. According to witnesses, he staggered into the house and died on the 17th step of the main staircase. Guests still report hearing footsteps climbing those stairs, stopping precisely at the 17th step. During the Civil War, Union soldiers reportedly used the mansion as a headquarters, and some say the spirits of Confederate and Union soldiers still roam the grounds, eternally fighting battles that ended more than a century ago. The most frequently reported phenomena at the Myrtles include piano music playing by itself. The plantation's antique grand piano has been heard playing funeral dirges and children's songs when no one is in the music room. Visitors have walked in to find the piano bench pulled out as if someone had just finished playing. Cold spots and sudden temperature drops occur throughout the house, often accompanied by the scent of magnolia blossoms or the less pleasant odor of decay and death. Visitors report being tucked into bed by invisible hands, having their hair stroked by unseen fingers, and awakening to find small gifts, flowers, jewelry, or period trinkets left on their nightstands by unknown benefactors. The mansion's current owners have embraced its supernatural reputation, offering ghost tours and overnight stays for brave visitors. Many visitors come hoping for paranormal experiences, and few leave disappointed. The guest book is filled with accounts of encounters, doors opening and closing on their own, mysterious footsteps in empty hallways, and the sensation of invisible hands touching shoulders or faces. Professional paranormal investigators have recorded dozens of hours of unexplained audio phenomena at the Myrtles, including whispered voices speaking names of long-dead residents, the sound of period music playing in empty rooms, and the distinct voices of children calling for their mother. One of the most chilling aspects of the Myrtles' reputation is how current events seem to awaken the spirits. During thunderstorms, activity increases dramatically, as if the electrical energy in the atmosphere somehow strengthens the connection between worlds. Today, the Myrtles Plantation operates as a bed and breakfast, welcoming visitors who come to experience Southern hospitality with a supernatural twist. Whether drawn by its architectural beauty, its historical significance, or its otherworldly residents, guests find that the Myrtles offers an unforgettable glimpse into a past that refuses to remain buried. The plantation stands as a testament to the complex and often tragic history of the antebellum South, where the grandeur of mansion life was built upon the suffering of enslaved people, whose spirits, like Chloe's, remain tied to the land where they lived, loved, and died.
Story 3. The Winchester Mystery House, California's Architectural Enigma. In the heart of San Jose, California, stands one of America's most peculiar architectural wonders, a sprawling Victorian mansion that defies logic, challenges architectural conventions, and has captivated visitors for over a century. The Winchester Mystery House, with its maze-like corridors, staircases leading to nowhere, and doors that open onto walls, tells the extraordinary story of Sarah Winchester, a woman driven by grief to create a home unlike any other on earth. Sarah Lockwood Pardee Winchester was born in 1839 to a prosperous family in New Haven, Connecticut. In 1862, she married William Wirt Winchester, heir to the Winchester Repeating Arms Company fortune, a company whose rifles had become synonymous with the American frontier and, tragically, with death and violence across the expanding nation. For 20 years, Sarah and William lived a comfortable life in New Haven. Their happiness seemed complete with the birth of their daughter Annie in 1866. However, their joy was short-lived. Baby Annie died of marasmus, a wasting disease, when she was only 6 weeks old. Sarah, devastated by the loss, fell into a deep depression from which she never fully recovered. As if fate had not been cruel enough, in 1881, William Winchester died of tuberculosis, leaving Sarah a widow at 42 with an inheritance that would change her life forever. She inherited $20 million, an astronomical sum in 1881, and received daily dividends of approximately $1,000 from the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, making her one of the wealthiest women in America. But Sarah's vast wealth brought her no peace. Consumed by grief and guilt over the Winchester rifle's role in countless deaths across America, she began to believe that her family was cursed by the spirits of all those killed by Winchester firearms. According to family accounts, a medium in Boston told Sarah that she was being haunted by the victims of Winchester rifles, and that to appease these spirits, she must move west and build a home for them, a sanctuary where the restless dead could find peace. In 1884, Sarah purchased a modest 8-room farmhouse on 161 acres in Santa Clara Valley, California. What began as a simple relocation became a 38-year obsession that would transform the humble farmhouse into a 7-story, 160-room mansion that sprawled across several acres.
Story 4. Gettysburg's Eternal Battlefield, Pennsylvania's most haunted ground. In the rolling hills of southern Pennsylvania, where wheat fields once swayed in summer breezes, lies America's most haunted battlefield. Gettysburg, site of the Civil War's bloodiest and most decisive battle, holds within its 6,000 acres the memories of over 51,000 casualties from just 3 days in July 1863. Here, where the fate of a nation was decided, the past seems to live on with startling intensity. The Battle of Gettysburg, fought from July 1 to 3, 1863, marked the turning point of the American Civil War. Confederate General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia clashed with Union Major General George Gordon Meade's Army of the Potomac in a desperate struggle that would determine whether the Confederate forces could successfully invade the North. What began as a chance encounter between Confederate and Union forces searching for supplies escalated into the largest battle ever fought in North America. By the time the cannons fell silent on July 3rd, the fields of Gettysburg were littered with the bodies of young men from across the continent, soldiers who had marched into battle with dreams of glory and died far from home in a struggle for the soul of America. The sheer scale of death at Gettysburg was unprecedented. In 3 days, more Americans died than in any other battle in the nation's history. Bodies lay scattered across farms and fields, in forests and along stone walls, creating scenes of carnage that traumatized even experienced soldiers. Many of the dead were hastily buried in shallow graves or left where they fell for days before burial details could reach them. It was perhaps inevitable that such intense suffering and sudden death would leave its mark upon the landscape itself. Within months of the battle, local residents began reporting strange encounters that suggested the fallen soldiers had not entirely departed from the fields where they died. The paranormal activity at Gettysburg is as diverse as it is persistent. Visitors, park rangers, historians, and local residents have reported encounters that span every category of supernatural phenomena. The Phantom Regiment of Little Rock Top. Little Rock Top, the rocky hill that anchored the left flank of the Union line, witnessed some of the fiercest fighting of the battle. The 20th Maine Infantry, commanded by Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, made their famous bayonet charge down the hill slopes on July 2nd, saving the Union Army from potential disaster. Park visitors frequently report seeing Civil War soldiers marching across Little Rock Top, particularly at dawn and dusk. These figures appear solid and real, until observers move closer, when they fade away like morning mist. The ghostly soldiers are always seen in period uniforms, carrying muskets and moving in formation across the rocky terrain where their living counterparts fought so desperately. Professional photographers have captured dozens of unexplained images at Little Rock Top, figures in Union blue appearing in photographs where no reenactors were present, shadowy forms moving among the rocks, and mysterious lights floating above the battlefield at night. The Ghosts of Pickett's Charge. On July 3, 1863, General George Pickett led approximately 15,000 Confederate soldiers in a massive frontal assault across nearly a mile of open ground toward the center of the Union line. The attack, which became known as Pickett's Charge, was a desperate gamble that failed catastrophically, with Confederate casualties exceeding 50%. The field across which Pickett's men advanced is now one of the most actively haunted areas of the battlefield. Visitors report seeing Confederate soldiers emerging from the tree line and marching across the field, their gray uniforms clearly visible in broad daylight. These ghostly regiments march in perfect formation until they reach the area where the historical charge was broken, where they vanish as suddenly as they appeared. During thunderstorms, witnesses report hearing the sounds of battle, musket fire, cannon blasts, and the cries of wounded men echoing across the field where thousands of Confederate soldiers fell. The phenomena are so consistent that local ghost tour guides can predict with remarkable accuracy when and where the sounds will occur. The hospital hauntings. During and after the battle, every available building in Gettysburg was converted into makeshift hospitals. Private homes, churches, barns, and schools became scenes of desperate medical efforts as overwhelmed surgeons worked around the clock to save as many lives as possible. Many of these locations continue to experience paranormal activity related to their wartime use as hospitals. The Farnshouse Inn, which served as a Confederate sharpshooter's position and later as a field hospital, is renowned for its ghostly encounters. Guests report seeing wounded soldiers lying in beds, hearing groans and cries for help echoing through the halls, and encountering the spirits of nurses and doctors still tending to patients who died over 150 years ago. The Cashtown Inn, located 8 miles west of Gettysburg, served as Confederate General A.P. Hill's headquarters and later as a hospital for wounded soldiers from both armies. Staff and guests regularly encounter the spirits of Civil War soldiers in the inn's rooms and hallways. The most frequent apparition is that of a young Confederate soldier who appears to be searching for someone, calling out names of comrades who never made it home. The eternal sentries. Perhaps the most poignant of Gettysburg's ghost stories involve the spirits of soldiers who continued to stand guard over their former positions. Park rangers and early morning visitors report encountering Civil War soldiers standing at attention at various locations throughout the battlefield. These ghostly sentries appear most often at dawn, standing motionless at spots that held strategic importance during the battle. They seem aware of living observers but do not interact, maintaining their eternal vigil over ground they died defending. When approached, they fade away, only to reappear at the same locations on subsequent mornings. The photography phenomenon. Gettysburg has become a mecca for paranormal photography, with visitors capturing thousands of unexplained images over the decades. The most common anomalies include figures in period military dress appearing in photographs where no reenactors were present, often showing remarkable detail despite the subjects being translucent or partially transparent. Orbs of light that appear to move with intelligence and purpose, often clustering around monuments or areas of intense fighting. Mysterious mists and fog banks that appear in photographs taken on clear days, sometimes forming shapes that resemble marching soldiers or cavalry units. The children of Gettysburg. Not all of Gettysburg's spirits are soldiers. The town's civilians, including children, also suffered during the battle, and some of their spirits seem to remain tied to the area. The Jenny Wade house, where the only civilian killed during the battle died, is home to several child spirits who interact playfully with young visitors. Children visiting the battlefield often report seeing playmates in old-fashioned clothing who seem to know details about the battle that living children shouldn't possess. These encounters are typically pleasant, with the ghostly children appearing curious about modern visitors rather than frightening them. The anomaly effect. Paranormal activity at Gettysburg intensifies dramatically during the anniversary dates of the battle, July 1 to 3. Hotels, restaurants, and tour operators report a significant increase in ghostly encounters during this period, as if the temporal proximity to the original events somehow strengthens the connection between past and present.
During these anniversary periods, the battlefield takes on an almost electric atmosphere, with sensitive visitors reporting overwhelming emotional experiences and encounters with spirits who seem more solid and interactive than at other times of the year. Modern investigations. Professional paranormal investigators have conducted extensive research at Gettysburg, using modern technology to document the unexplained phenomena. Electronic voice phenomena recordings have captured hundreds of voices speaking in period dialects, often providing names, regiment numbers, and details that match historical records. Electromagnetic field detectors register significant anomalies at locations throughout the battlefield, particularly in areas where the heaviest fighting occurred. Thermal imaging equipment has recorded human-shaped cold spots moving across the battlefield in formation, following the same paths taken by military.
Story 5. The Stanley Hotel, Colorado's inspiration for horror. High in the Colorado Rockies, overlooking the majestic town of Estes Park, stands a gleaming white Georgian colonial hotel that has captured the imaginations of ghost hunters and horror fans worldwide. The Stanley Hotel, built in 1909 by inventor F.O. Stanley, is renowned not only for its breathtaking mountain views and elegant architecture, but also as the inspiration for Stephen King's The Shining and as one of America's most actively haunted hotels. Freeland Oscar Stanley was a remarkable man of his era, an inventor, entrepreneur, and visionary who co-created the Stanley Steamer automobile with his twin brother Francis. Diagnosed with tuberculosis in 1903, F.O. Stanley was told by his doctors that he had little time to live. Desperate to improve his health, Stanley and his wife Flora moved to the clean, thin air of the Colorado mountains, where the climate was believed to be beneficial for lung ailments. The mountain air worked miracles for Stanley's health. Not only did he recover completely from his tuberculosis, but he lived another 37 years, eventually dying at the age of 91. Grateful for his recovery and enchanted by the natural beauty of Estes Park, Stanley decided to build a luxury resort that would allow other wealthy tourists to experience the rejuvenating power of the Rocky Mountains. Construction of the Stanley Hotel began in 1907, with no expense spared in creating what Stanley envisioned as the finest resort in the American West. The hotel featured every modern convenience of the early 20th century: electricity throughout the building, private bathrooms in every room, a state-of-the-art heating system, and even a telephone in every guest room, luxuries that were rare even in major cities of that era. The hotel officially opened in 1909, quickly becoming a destination for America's elite. Wealthy industrialists, famous actors, and European nobility flocked to the Stanley Hotel to enjoy its elegant accommodations, stunning mountain vistas, and the social atmosphere that F.O. and Flora Stanley cultivated with their gracious hospitality. However, from its earliest days, the Stanley Hotel was home to more than just wealthy guests. Staff members and visitors began reporting strange encounters that suggested the hotel was inhabited by unseen residents who had never checked out. The Piano Man of the Concert Hall. The hotel's concert hall, built to host evening entertainment for guests, became the scene of the Stanleys' first documented paranormal encounter. In the winter of 1911, when the hotel was closed for the season, the lone caretaker reported hearing piano music coming from the concert hall late at night. When he investigated, he found the grand piano playing by itself, not random notes, but complete classical pieces performed with skill and emotion. The caretaker, a practical man named William Thompson, initially thought someone was hiding in the hotel, but thorough searches revealed no intruders. The phantom pianist has continued to perform for over a century.
Guests and staff regularly report hearing beautiful piano music coming from the concert hall when the room is empty and locked. The playing style has been analyzed by music experts, who note that it demonstrates advanced technique and suggests the phantom pianist was a highly skilled musician in life.
Story 6. Eastern State Penitentiary, Philadelphia's Monument to Isolation. In the heart of Philadelphia stands a massive stone fortress that once housed some of America's most notorious criminals and pioneered a revolutionary and ultimately tragic approach to criminal rehabilitation. Eastern State Penitentiary, which operated from 1829 to 1971, was designed to reform prisoners through complete isolation and reflection, but instead became a breeding ground for madness, despair, and supernatural phenomena that persist to this day. Eastern State was conceived during the height of Enlightenment thinking, when reformers believed that criminals could be rehabilitated through moral reflection and religious contemplation. The penitentiary's design, created by architect John Havland, was revolutionary for its time, featuring a radial design with 7 cell blocks extending like spokes from a central hub, allowing guards to observe all areas of the prison from a single vantage point. Each cell was designed as a complete living space where prisoners would spend virtually their entire sentences in solitude. The cells featured individual exercise yards, plumbing, and skylights designed to represent the eye of God watching over the inmates. Prisoners were hooded whenever they left their cells to prevent them from seeing other inmates or learning the layout of the prison. This system of complete isolation, known as the Pennsylvania system, was intended to force criminals to confront their sins and emerge as reformed individuals. Instead, it drove many prisoners to madness, suicide, and despair that seems to have left an indelible mark on the prison's very stones. The horrors of solitary confinement. From its opening day, Eastern State Penitentiary was a place of profound suffering. Prisoners were kept in complete isolation for years at a time, with no human contact except brief interactions with guards and clergy. They were forbidden to speak, sing, or make any noise that might communicate with other inmates. This system of complete isolation, known as the Pennsylvania system, was intended to force criminals to confront their sins and emerge as reformed individuals. Instead, it drove many prisoners to madness, suicide, and despair that seems to have left an indelible mark on the prison's very stones. The horrors of solitary confinement. From its opening day, Eastern State Penitentiary was a place of profound suffering. Prisoners were kept in complete isolation for years at a time, with no human contact except brief interactions with guards and clergy. They were forbidden to speak, sing, or make any noise that might communicate with other inmates. The psychological effects of this extreme isolation were devastating. Prison records document hundreds of cases of mental breakdown, with inmates developing what doctors of the era termed prison psychosis. Prisoners spoke to imaginary companions, engaged in self-mutilation, and frequently attempted suicide. The punishment cells, known as the holes, were even more brutal than the regular isolation cells. These underground chambers were completely dark, often flooded with sewage, and barely large enough for a human being to lie down. Prisoners were sometimes kept in these conditions for months at a time, emerging permanently damaged by the experience. Charles Dickens, who visited Eastern State in 1842, was so horrified by what he witnessed that he wrote, "The system here is rigid, strict, and hopeless solitary confinement. I believe it in its effects to be cruel and wrong. I hold this slow and daily tampering with the mysteries of the brain to be immeasurably worse than any torture of the body." The birth of supernatural activity. The intense suffering experienced within Eastern State's walls created conditions that seem almost designed to produce paranormal phenomena. The combination of extreme emotional trauma, sudden death, and the prison's oppressive atmosphere has resulted in one of America's most haunted locations. Staff members began reporting strange encounters almost from the prison's opening day. Guards described hearing voices calling from empty cells, footsteps echoing through vacant corridors, and the sensation of invisible hands touching them during night rounds. The phenomena intensified over the decades as more prisoners lived and died within the penitentiary's walls. By the early 20th century, guards and inmates alike accepted the presence of spirits as a fact of prison life, with supernatural encounters becoming so common that they were rarely officially reported. Cell Block 12. Cell Block 12, the last cell block built at Eastern State in the 1950s, has become the focal point of the prison's paranormal activity. This cell block housed some of the prison's most violent and disturbed inmates, and the concentration of negative energy seems to have created a supernatural hotspot. Visitors to Cell Block 12 consistently report the most intense paranormal experiences at Eastern State. The phenomena include shadowy figures moving through the cells, always seen in peripheral vision but disappearing when directly observed. These shadow people appeared to retain human form but seemed composed of pure darkness, moving with purpose through areas they once knew intimately. Disembodied voices calling out from empty cells, sometimes speaking names of former inmates or guards, other times simply moaning or crying in apparent distress. Audio equipment has recorded these voices speaking in languages and accents consistent with the prison's historical population. Physical sensations of being touched, pushed, or grabbed by invisible hands. Visitors frequently report feeling sudden temperature drops, the sensation of breath on their necks, and the feeling of being watched by hostile, unseen eyes. Cell doors slamming shut with tremendous force when no one is present, often startling tour groups and creating echoes that seem to trigger additional paranormal activity throughout the cell block. The infamous inmates. Eastern State housed notorious criminals whose spirits may contribute to its supernatural atmosphere. The most famous was Al Capone, who served time at Eastern State in 1929 to 1930. Capone's cell was luxuriously appointed with fine furniture, a radio, and other amenities that his wealth and influence could secure from the prison. Visitors to Capone's former cell report encounters with a well-dressed spirit who appears to be entertaining invisible guests with the sounds of jazz music and party conversation. The spirit seems jovial and non-threatening, perhaps reflecting Capone's relatively comfortable experience at Eastern State compared to most inmates. Other notorious inmates have also left their mark on the prison. Bank robber Willie Sutton, who spent time at Eastern State in the 1940s, is believed to be responsible for paranormal activity in Cell Block 6, where his escape attempts were legendary. Visitors report seeing a figure frantically digging or working on cell walls, apparently continuing Sutton's eternal quest for freedom. The Medical Wing Horrors. Eastern State's medical wing, where prisoners received what passed for health care in the 19th and early 20th centuries, is one of the most active paranormal areas of the prison. The primitive medical practices of the era, combined with the high mortality rate among inmates, created conditions of immense suffering. The medical wing's surgical areas are particularly active, with visitors reporting the sounds of medical procedures, bone saws, drilling, and the screams of patients undergoing surgery without adequate anesthesia echoing through rooms that have been empty for decades. Apparitions of medical staff in period clothing continuing to work on invisible patients, moving through the motions of procedures with grim determination. The overwhelming scent of antiseptic and decay appearing suddenly in specific locations, often accompanied by dramatic temperature drops and the sensation of invisible presences. Visitors with medical backgrounds often report feeling physically ill when entering certain areas of the medical wing, as if the suffering experienced there has somehow saturated the environment. Death row desperation. Eastern State's death row housed prisoners awaiting execution, creating an atmosphere of hopelessness and terror that seems to persist decades after the last execution. The electric chair used at Eastern State was relocated to the prison in 1913, and over 300 prisoners were executed in the prison's death chamber. The death row area is characterized by intense paranormal activity, including apparitions of condemned men pacing in their cells, apparently reliving their final days over and over again. These spirits appear solid and real, but fade when approached, leaving behind an atmosphere of despair and resignation.
The sounds of the electric chair in operation, the mechanical noises, electrical humming, and the distinct odor of burned flesh occurring in the execution chamber when no equipment is present. Voices pleading for mercy, declaring innocence, or reciting final prayers in languages representing the diverse population that passed through Eastern State's death row. The sensation of overwhelming grief and fear that affects even skeptical visitors, creating emotional responses that seem entirely disproportionate to the empty and abandoned rooms they're exploring. Modern investigations and tourism. Eastern State Penitentiary closed as an active prison in 1971 and sat abandoned for decades before being opened to the public as a historic site and museum. The prison now operates tours that focus both on its historical significance and its supernatural reputation. Professional paranormal investigators have conducted extensive research at Eastern State, documenting phenomena that suggest the presence of multiple spirits